Welcome to the Living Free podcast, where we talk about building a life without limits. Today is episode 1. Now, I have done other episodes of this podcast already, syndicated on the Living Free in Tennessee podcast, and this one will syndicate there as well. But this is our first episode that's going to go out on the feed as the Living Free podcast, which is a podcast that explores people's stories about how they're building freedom into their lives and their journey to go from where they started to a much more fulfilled and free life, with the idea that freedom is a choice. And while freedom isn't complicated, it's also not always easy because you need to do something every day to build freedom into your life. So Tactical Redneck is going to be on today. Hi. Make sure your mic is pointed up, maybe. Okay. And we decided to make this one the first one because he's going to tell his story about building freedom into his life as a combat veteran that had a lot of problems. So we're going to tell the whole backstory here. And you'll find that we hit some backstories of different things over time. But I don't think today's going to be an easy conversation. So if you are not good with easy conversation, we're going to talk about some pretty dark stuff today. This is not the episode for you. And I'm telling you now that if you don't want to hear sad, depressing, scary things, this is not the episode for you. But in order to understand what he had to do to change and to start his path on a more positive side, we are going to start on the negative side. So if you're in the live stream and have questions or comments along the way, put the word question or comments in all caps. I'm going to be talking to Tactical, who is to my right. Y'all are to my left over here where I'm looking off camera right now. So every so often I'll just scan and see and then star things and see if we can work them into the conversation. I think it's funny right now that I'm like way below the screen and his head is cut off by the screen on the video. That's super funny.
Yeah.
That's actually an illustration of the fact that Tactical is a foot taller than I am.
Something like that.
Yeah, and you're sitting on a taller chair than I am. We should have been in other chairs.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty funny. So with that, I do have 2 sponsors of today's show. The first one is Hollow Roast Coffee. Hollow Roast brings you fresh roasted coffee delivered straight to your door anywhere in the United States or military addresses, unless you're in a country that does not allow coffee specifically from the USA, like Germany. If you're on a base in Germany, sucks to be you. Anyway, hollowroast.com is where you can get that. And we are doing a coffee pre-buy right now to help offset the replacement of an HVAC unit that, well, it died a horrible death. And that's over hollowroast.com. The second sponsor of today is Above Phone. My Above Phone's right over here. This is an Above Phone, and it is how you take control of your digital sovereignty. You get to control who sees what on that phone. And obviously, if you're sending it over your carrier's digital lines, then, things happen that way. Like if you're being monitored on an audio call, you're being monitored on an audio call. But all of those apps and things on our smartphones that link us to all sorts of different things usually mine additional information with the idea of advertising. But then if they get subpoenaed, they can share that all sorts of different ways that you may not want it shared. So why not take control of everything you can and become more digitally literate about how to protect your data? Find out more at abovephone.com. Use the coupon code LivingFreeTN for Living Free in Tennessee, and that will get you $50 off a device. They also have computers there that are pretty darn cool. So if you're looking at having a more private setup for your computer, that's great. And if you're like, this is too much, Nicole, I'm not a tech person, listen, I turned mine on and it worked. That's all I'm going to say. And if you have a different experience than that, you do get a free consult session when you buy one of those devices. With that, we're going to go into this conversation that Tactical's been looking forward to all day.
Yeah.
Okay, Tactical. Start by saying who you are.
So, my name is Chris. Most people know me as the Tactical Redneck.
Okay. I didn't know you were going to out yourself completely today.
Some people know me by different names.
And why have you been running around the holler, not getting anything done all the way from beginning to end since you got up this morning. Are you freaked out by this?
A little bit.
A little bit. I've got clary sage and some lavender diffusing to help maybe make this a little easier.
Yeah.
There's Kleenex up there if you need them.
Okay.
Okay. Tactical has kind of a dark past, and a lot of people that we talk to on the journey to freedom do. Today, he's going to do his best to share with you, but he's spent many years not talking about this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why didn't you talk about any of these things?
It's dark, it's painful, and especially as we get into some of it, I'm sure we'll talk about why people like me generally only tend to talk about it with people that have been through it.
Okay. So, Tactical, what was it like? What was your childhood like? Big family? Tell us about that.
My childhood was good. I grew up in Mississippi. I was homeschooled almost the entire time. And my dad worked a lot, so I didn't get to see him that much. Weekends, we'd see him a good bit. My mom was raising 5 kids, so there was, she was always extremely busy with trying to maintain a household. And then, my youngest sister is 13 years younger than me, so there was a big, age difference there. But overall, I had a pretty good childhood.
So you finished high school and you just decided to join the military, right?
Yes.
What was your like? Why did you want to join the military? What was your motivation there?
I was one of those kids that I despised school. I hated everything about it. I was actually fairly decent at math, but of every subject in school, I probably hated math the most. And so I knew that there was absolutely no possible way that I was going to college. So originally I was looking at either law enforcement or the military. And my uncle was military. Both my grandfathers were military. At least one of my great grandfathers was military. So I think I always kind of leaned more towards the military side of things. I grew up watching all of the old World War II movies, The Dirty Dozen, The Devil's Brigade, all the classics.
Were you sort of drawn into, I'm going to protect people? Like, was there something about your nature that made you want to join the military? Was it the packaging of those movies made it seem cool? Like, what were you thinking when you went in? What did you think?
There was definitely an aspect of all of that. Watching all of the movies, there's the aspect of, being able to protect the country, do good things, all that kind of thing. And I enlisted pre 9/11. So we were actually on the rifle range when 9/11 happened. And I remember going to the chow hall that morning and we couldn't see the TVs, but we could see all of the drill instructors just basically staring in disbelief. And so we knew something was up. We just didn't know what. And we didn't find out until close to lunchtime. And of course, at that point, all the drill instructors were like, yeah, the last thing you need to graduate boot camp is qualify on the rifle range. So next Friday, y'all are all going to be in Afghanistan.
Is that how fast that happened for you?
No. I missed Afghanistan. I wound up graduating boot camp, went to my MOS school, ended up going to 3rd Tracks out of Camp Pendleton. Did a deployment to Okinawa, and then we got pulled to go to Iraq in 03.
Okay, so before we go to Iraq, what were you like mentally then? Were you prone to anger, filled with hate, aggressive? How would you describe your personality at that point before?
I mean, I've always kind of...
You were an 18-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Boy, man.
I had anger issues like most kids. Did not really know what to do with that. But, overall, growing up in the South, growing up in a Christian home, I was definitely raised to be a nice person. And overall, there's always been an aspect where I enjoy helping other people, even if it's something little. There's always
Like
seem to get
picking
something...
passion flowers and blackberries?
Sure.
Yeah.
The only reason I did that.
I'm sure.
It wasn't because I wanted to eat them.
Not at all. You didn't have to share them, though. Anyway, so you had some anger issues, which is not atypical of an 18-year-old.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if my anger issues back then were out of the ordinary. I just never really knew what to do with it, so I usually tended to just separate and go out in the woods or something.
Okay, so you would shut down out of anger, not punch the wall.
I never punched the wall in the house. I might break a stick while I was out in the woods or something, but I don't think it was necessarily anything that out of the ordinary for a teenage boy.
Yep. Thanks for the encouragement. Tori says, such a great episode, and it's only been a few minutes, so you're doing well. So now you go to Okinawa, and that was not traumatic for you, right?
No.
Then you got sent to Iraq. Now, which branch of the military were you in, and why is Iraq a turning point for you?
So I was with the Marine Corps, and
I didn't get any crayons for this show.
Oh, what a tragedy.
What's your favorite color?
I don't know.
What's your favorite flavor?
I don't know.
Anyway, go ahead. It's not purple?
No. Definitely not purple.
Okay.
But I was actually advanced party in Okinawa for a deployment there.
What does it mean?
We had about, I think there was 21 or 22 of us that got pulled to go over in advance of everybody else to start signing for equipment, doing inspections and all that kind of thing. And then we got pulled aside on Friday, told that everything about us going to Iraq was just rumors. And then we got pulled aside by our officer and said, yeah, that's bullshit. We're flying back next week. And so we got sent to Kuwait in February of 03. And we were expecting to be sitting there for 6 to 9 months. The only thing we really had to compare to was Desert Storm, which was a long just sit in the desert and wait. And obviously that did not happen then.
What happened?
I think we got there February 3rd. And it was something like 2 o'clock in the morning, February 19th, I want to say. The first sergeant walked in, woke everybody up. Once everybody was kind of sitting up, all he said was, pack your shit. We knew what that meant. It was about to kick off. So we got loaded up and then moved to a series of staging areas. So we started moving sometime after first light, and we're basically moving, stop at a place for a while, and then move to another point until we finally got to our final staging area.
Was that hard?
There's a huge mental component of you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I mean, you got some general ideas, but rumors had been flying about all sorts of different stuff. We knew that there was a huge possibility of biological weapons, which, I mean, especially when you've been trained on that, and it's not like some big mystery to you what's going to happen if you get hit with that. You know exactly what's going to happen to you because you've been trained on it. You've been trained to recognize all the signs and symptoms and side effects and everything else. And so, I mean, you don't know what to expect. So that was, constantly in the back of your mind the whole day while you're moving up. And then it's just a series of move and wait all day long. And the waiting part was probably the worst of it because you got time to sit there and think and you have nothing else to do but think.
So would you say the psychological impact of not knowing was the hardest part of that time?
Probably, yeah.
Did you talk with the other people around you as you were doing that about that at all?
No.
Or was it just like we're dudes and we don't talk about emotions?
There was a lot of silence. And I mean, I was driving a Retrans Humvee, which is basically a Humvee with a giant set of radios in it, and we would go out in between different units and basically act as a radio repeater. So in my Humvee, it was me and one other dude. And we didn't really get along that well to start with. And so we did not talk that much. And the little talking we did do was all business and not much of anything else.
So you were sent out alone with somebody you didn't get along with terribly well to repeat signal. How vulnerable to attack were you at that point?
I mean, while we were moving up, we were with everybody else. So there was one or two times where we broke off in Kuwait to, act as a repeating station. But that was still, I mean, it was low risk. It was more of once we got in country where things got very real very quickly.
So then you ended up in Iraq.
Yes.
How much infrastructure was in place to support military action when you got to Iraq?
Initially, it wasn't bad. The further into Iraq we got, the more our logistic lines got stretched and resupply became a lot less.
What did that mean, like tangibly speaking, for your soldiers?
I mean, all of our supplies were coming from the same location the whole time. So the further we got away from them, the longer they had to travel. And I remember hitting a point, I have no idea where we were, but we were on the side of this highway, and one of the master sergeants came by and was like, y'all need to start pulling all those metal posts. And we're like, why? Like, the combat engineers are a mile down the road. Why don't you get them to come do that? He was like, they're about to land a C-130 with food, fuel, and ammunition. We were like, go chain out the truck. Because, I mean, we had 50 cal gunners that were down to a partial box of ammo, and a box of ammo is 50 rounds in a belt-fed machine gun. So being down to less than a box, you're almost out. Like, you've got maybe 2 to 3 pulls of the trigger and you're done. So
why is that bad in a war zone? So, I mean, like, seriously.
yeah, I mean, it for the 50 cals, that's one of your primary suppressing fire weapons. And I mean, we had a lot of guys that were just, I mean, they were low on everything. We had guys that were almost, if not, on their last MRE. And water over there was obviously always an issue. Fuel could be an issue a lot of times. I remember a huge pucker factor when we refueled off of a destroyed Iraqi fuel tanker. And it was like one of our motor T guys looked at the fuel and was like, it looks clean. And I'm like, that's not very comforting. Like, that's not comforting at all. It looks clean. And I'm going to put that in my Humvee and possibly stall in the middle of God knows what, because bad fuel. But I mean, it's what we had. So we did it. Unfortunately, I mean, it actually worked okay. Wasn't the greatest fuel I've ever had, but.
Well, I know Iraq was a turning point for you psychologically, and the part you don't want to talk about, you're talking around right now. So what happened? Like, what was that really like psychologically for people on the ground there to be out there without enough supplies, not sure when your next supplies are coming in, sometimes isolated without even enough guns to defend yourself, heading into a country with people who wanted to kill you?
Yeah, and that was something that varied widely depending on, who you were and what you were doing. For me, especially most of the first part of it, there was a lot of me being out there with one other dude, and he had a 9mm, which is basically useless in a desert where all of your engagements are going to be at distance. I was supposed to have an M240, which is a belt-fed machine gun. That got pulled and given to a different crew. Initially, I got 150 rounds of 5.56 ammo and some smoke rounds for my 203. I managed to scrounge an extra bandolier of ammo and 2 HE rounds for my 203, so at least I had something worth shooting with. But, going out by yourself, and I didn't have GPS either, so the map that I had was literally printed at Kinko's. Like, no joke, it was in a nice little homemade binder looking thing, but that's what I'm out there by myself with 2 HE rounds and this Kinko printed map navigating around the middle of a war zone. And it was very isolating. And we did a lot of night movement because we have NVGs. So the theory was we could see, they can't. Of course, NVGs need some ambient light to work. And I swear I did not see the moon for 4 months. So the NVGs, or at least for me, were almost worthless.
Did you wear them or did you just take them off?
I always had them in my hand, and I would put the NVGs up to one eye, usually my left eye, to try to see if I could see something. And that way I didn't kill the night vision in my right eye. But I very, very rarely just wore them because you couldn't see anything because there was just no ambient light. I mean, there's obviously no city lights in the middle of the desert. And I mean, it was like, I don't remember seeing the moon or stars at all the whole time. And so there was a lot of times just being out there in the pitch black. And I mean, my philosophy was, if anything happens, we're going to run as quickly as possible and do whatever it takes to avoid getting into a firefight, because I'm not equipped for that. And especially, like, most Marines are trained in, team tactics, basically. You've got snipers that are trained to go out by themselves. I'm not a sniper. I'm not trained for that. So, I mean, hindsight, I mean, I've always had a hard time driving at night in the last years, and not until recently realized that it was all tied to that.
So how did that mess with your head? Like, how did that change you emotionally and psychologically, would you say? Just that.
I mean, just that. I mean, it puts a certain kind of paranoia into you. And it's every little sound, movement. If I'm out at night, it's like anything out of the ordinary, anything I shouldn't be there, my brain is automatically just like threat. And it could be the wind blowing, but your brain starts going into that paranoid state. And I mean, you're basically going into fight or flight just because I'm out driving at night.
Now, you told me when you were in Iraq, you didn't know if you would get enough to eat because of the resupply problem. And so you started not eating your full rations and hiding them so that you would have something in the future when resupply didn't happen.
I wasn't hiding it, but
hiding, it's my words.
The Humvee that I was driving had 4 captain seats. So it had 2 captain seats in the back, and underneath was this hollow compartment. So one of the things that I started doing was, early on, when we're still in Kuwait, was just field stripping my MREs. So you open up every single MRE you get. As soon as you get them, dump it, take all of the useless stuff and toss it. And then I would compact everything down. And in one of the compartments behind my seat and underneath the rear seat, I had everything stacked in there as compact as I could get it. So I basically started building my own reserve of extra food.
Guys, this is a wartime prepper pantry he's talking about right now.
It basically was.
Yeah. Did you end up having to give some of that to your fellow soldiers because they ran out, or how did you just use it for you? What did you do with it?
The whole thing is kind of a blur because, I mean, we went nonstop for weeks, but I'm fairly certain I do remember a certain period where a couple of guys were low and I had a fairly decent stockpile, so I gave them some extra stuff just to make sure that they could make it long enough. And they were also exerting themselves a lot more than I was, so they needed the extra calories. So I believe I do remember giving some of that out to a couple of guys.
So why are your memories so hazy of that time?
I mean, everything was fast-paced. And, we got it. They tried to beat it into our heads so hard that when we hit the breach lanes, make everybody sleep in shifts. And of course, none of us listened. And my best guesstimation is I was basically awake for somewhere between 3 to 4 days. And you throw that in with the combat stress, and night driving and everything else, and it's just all a blur. And because we were mostly driving at night, I mean, there was a lot of times where it's like, if I found out we're going to be somewhere for 10 minutes, it's like, okay, I'm getting some sleep. And I figured out that I could take, with wearing my Kevlar, I could basically lean my head over and force my Kevlar in between the door jamb and the seat. And it was a relatively comfortable way to get a couple of minutes of sleep. And so I would sleep for 20, 30 minutes at a time, maybe if I was lucky 2 or 3 times a night. And so it was just an extreme amount of sleep deprivation.
While being psychologically tested.
Yes. And you stack all of that up in layers. And it was just, with the fast pace of everything, it's just, everything was just a straight blur.
So what pushed you over the edge of PTSD, would you say, during that time? Because I don't, I think it happened after.
I mean, there was a number of things that happened.
We're running into the soldiers don't tell stories part of the interview. What are you comfortable sharing?
So there was on the outside of Sedan City. We hit Sedan City. And then we were on the way towards Baghdad. And we were fighting what was supposed to be a conventional war. We're fighting uniformed troops. And so a lot of, now the term IED is commonplace. It was not then. We'd never heard of that. Or at least I hadn't. And we were leaving Sedan City on this road. I don't know how fast we were going, but it was fast enough I couldn't stop. And I saw an artillery shell in a man-made hole in the middle of the road with wires coming out of it. It was a very surreal experience because for a second I got an image like I was watching my Humvee from a drone go up in the air. And I couldn't stop. And I went over it. And thankfully, nothing happened. But, I mean, all of that is just ingrained into my head. And I still, to this day, have issues with patches in the road. And I mean, that's a simple example of one scenario.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm not going to push you to share more that you don't want to share, first of all. And And I know other things happened because you've talked to me about some of those things.
Yes.
And it's not about painting pictures for people. Ready to go on?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to insert here additional things happened.
Yeah.
Some of which you feel guilty for surviving. Is that a good way to explain it?
You want to try to go into that one?
Do you want it? This is about what you want today. I know you came out alive because you're sitting here.
Yeah.
And I know multiple things happened there. And I know you lost people you love. And part of the thing that I think it's hard to explain to people who don't join the military and go to war is that survivor's guilt is like, it's scary to be in these situations, but then you do lose your friends, and that survivor's guilt it's almost, you feel like it might be harder than had you not, because then you wouldn't have to deal with it. Is that a good summary?
Decent. To go some detail on it, when we did hit Baghdad, they held all the non-essential soft skins back. So non-armored vehicles, which I was one of that was deemed non-essential. But because I was driving a retrans vehicle, I actually had the capability of listening the entire time. And it was like, if you've ever listened to a sports announcer at a baseball game, it was like that, but everything he said was horrible. It's one thing to feel helpless. It's another thing to have to listen to that. Knowing the capabilities you have to do something about it, but in that specific situation, there is absolutely nothing you can do. And so I don't know how long it was. It felt like forever. It was hours. I listened to one vehicle after another take hits. And then you know there's nothing you can do. Or you hear the call for the medevac. 3rd platoon. For whatever reason, all of my friends, all of my good friends, were stacked in 3rd platoon. So your brain goes wild and just runs. Who was it? What happened?
You don't have to go further. It's okay.
Oh,
go as far as you think you should. Okay.
It was somebody that I knew. Had a very lengthy conversation right before they stepped off. I would have given anything to trade places with him.
How long were you in the desert?
4 months.
How many showers did you get while you were there?
1.
Is that the one? Is that the best shower you've ever had your whole life?
It actually was.
Tell us about that.
So, I think we got 2 haircuts while we were there, and we just basically, I can't read it from
Pack
here.
Rat says, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Lots of people giving you comments.
But they would take the clippers and they would just buzz us. And then what we wound up doing was you would get your head wet. You would take your bayonet, which is dull, and you would scrape the mud off the top of your head. And then they could see a little bit better to clean up what they had just done. So that's how you kind of kept your head a little bit cleaner. But when we got back down to Kuwait on our way home, we were supposed to go to a place called LSA 5, Logistical Area 5. And we got there and they were like, we don't have a place to put you. So, or no, LSA 5 is where we ended up. We're supposed to go to, I think it was Camp Matilda, maybe. And that's where they said, we don't have a place to put you. Go back over to LSA 5, which is where we had started from. And we're like, is there anybody over there? They were like, no. What do you want us to do over there? It's like, I don't know. So we go over there and they had, as we were leaving, they had put these trailers in that were half sinks and half showers. And they had 2 800-gallon water tanks to feed them. And it's about sunset by the time we roll in there. So those tanks had been sitting there baking in the sun all day. And we roll up and everybody starts climbing out of their vehicles and we're looking at those trailers and somebody looked at the master sergeant and was like, hey, you got a key to that thing? No. They're going to need a new door. So we kicked the door in. And I don't remember how many of us there were. I think there was like maybe 16 of us. And we drained both 800-gallon water tanks. And I remember climbing in the shower, starting to get wet, looking down, and was like, oh. And I just took my foot and started scraping the mud into the drain. So it kind of went in gradually instead of all at once and clogged it up. And I mean, that image is just ingrained in my head of using my foot like a squeegee to scrape the mud down the drain. But that was, I mean, by far the best shower I've ever had in my life.
Was that about when you transitioned out of that part? Or did you go back?
No, that was like transitioning back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was on our way out. So we had left Baghdad, went to southern Iraq for a while. We got pulled back into Kuwait to turn our vehicles in. And I mean, this whole time it's still fast paced because I mean, we got back down there and it's like you got to get everything clean to a certain specification, out process, and get on a plane and fly back. So up until that point, everything was just one thing after the other. And then I can remember we flew back, got it back to Camp Pendleton at like, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning or something. We were told we were going on a 96, so we had 4 days off. So we got there, turned our weapons in, went up to the barracks, got checked in at the barracks. I remember walking into my room, dropping my sea bag, and standing there like, what now? I didn't know what to do.
So basically, you went through all of this, I'm going to call it a living hell.
Yeah.
And we didn't go into all the details, and we moved on to the shower on purpose because I think it was time. I just remember that shower story because you tell it fondly.
Yes.
And very quickly you were back in the United States. Like you went from I sleep in a Humvee 20 minutes at a time with my head wedged between the seat and the window to I'm in a barracks again. Now what?
Yeah, I want to say it was a 22-hour flight, so it was literally within a 24-hour period, you went from being in full kit, possibly somehow getting attacked, even though we were in Kuwait and it was a fairly safe area. You're still in a not so friendly country, to standing in, civvies in a barracks room in California within a 24-hour period. There was no decompression from that. And back then, like, I remember like our out processing, we got like a 15-minute speech from the chaplain about whatever he said. And then 5 minutes of the first sergeant telling everybody, you've been in country for 4 months, your alcohol tolerance is down, don't think you can go back and drink like you used to.
Okay.
That was our
That's great advice. Don't drink too much, you're going to get a bad hangover. That's what that was?
Basically. And that was our out processing. There wasn't any of this counselors or suicide hotlines. There was none of that. It was literally, turn your weapons in. Here's the keys to your barracks room. Have fun, boys.
So at that point, you're standing there, and then what happened next? Like, were you released from the military? Did you continue to serve for a bit longer?
No, I was in for a while longer. We were back in the States for, I think, 2 months to do some stuff there. And then we bounced right back out to Okinawa for 7 months to replace the company that we were originally supposed to replace over there. They got stuck in Okinawa for something like 16 months or something ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And
what would you say was your mental and emotional state during that time, during like finishing out your term?
It was still a lot of just dealing with the next thing, because what we inherited when we got to Okinawa was kind of a shambles. And so I remember that deployment, I looked at my master sergeant and I was like, Top, I'm just going to make an executive decision and say no more 72s, no more 96s, because every time they say we're going to get one of those, we wind up working the entire weekend. So let's just kill that now. Just regular weekends from here on out. And I mean, we did work most weekends we were there, so it was still really fast paced with stuff. And so, I mean, at that point, it was just a continuation of just dealing with what's in front of you. And at that point, I mean,
how would you describe your emotional state?
Thinking that I was normal.
Were you numb?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I was numb, but in hindsight, I can look back and see some of the red flags with the way I was in a lot of public settings and some other specific things. Um, I wound up, I got out in 2005 and wound up moving back to Mississippi. Was living in an apartment, and I remember there was a storm that was supposed to roll in that night. Didn't think much of it. I mean, growing up down there, it's like, who cares? It's gonna rain, whatever.
We had that last night. Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the night, there was a hit of thunder, which I realized that's what it was now. At the moment, I woke up to an explosion. I think if you've seen the cartoons where, they come straight out of the bed like a board and they, get like a foot or two off the bed, it literally did that. I don't know how high off the bed I came, but I hit the bed, went to roll out. There was like a 2-foot gap in between the bed and the wall. I face planted into the wall and bounced back onto the bed and laid there dazed for a second and finally realized where I was at. And my next thought was one of the gas stations exploded. So I went over and ripped the curtains open to look to see which gas station had exploded and realized that it was just thunder. And, I just was like, oh, well, that sucked. And I went back to bed. But, looking back on it now, I can realize that for a couple of seconds, at least subconsciously, my brain was back in country.
You still haven't answered my question about how you were doing emotionally.
Pretending that I was normal.
So you felt normal, but did you know you weren't normal at that point? Or was it like, how was your hate at that point? Did you have a lot of hate or anger? Was it different than before you went?
I think it was building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now that you actually say that, I can think of some specific examples of some situations where to put it as politely as I can, I lost my shit at somebody. And that's a polite way of saying it. And I mean, it's just another example of I might have thought I was normal, but with hindsight, I can look back and be like, yeah, that's a specific example of where at least subconsciously there was something that was not right.
Okay. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
And where we go from here, guys, is that may have felt dark. It gets darker after this. So I'm going to let him make a thing of tea. We're going to leave a blank screen. I was trying to think if we should just restart the stream. But I think we'll just mute and make a blank screen. We'll be back. How many minutes would you like? 5 minutes?
5.
Yeah, 5 minutes. We're going to talk about, so that was phase 1. Phase 2 is going to be from him getting out to the PTSD kind of slowly creeps up on him. So we'll talk about that next, and we'll see if we get phase 3 in today.
Okay.
Which is you had some turning points. So
yeah.
Be right back with the tea. All right, guys, I've got one question starred from Tori. Just FYI, waiting for Tactical to come back in. He'll be in shortly. And I had a little chat with him about just making sure where we're going next for phase 2, because this is the hardest part for him. Right now, I'm going to talk to you about why are we even doing this? Why are we talking about all this stuff? And we had to talk about this last night. He's felt like it's important to share his story so that other people who may have had, trauma happen in their life, whether it be from the veteran standpoint or other reasons, can learn what he did. And it may not be what you need to do, but what he did to come out of the dark place. And so do feel free to ask questions here in the live stream. I am starring them and I will probably hit them all at the end. But if you're feeling more private about this, like if you hear this podcast or watch this video and you want to share or you want to ask more questions, you can email me, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. And if you don't want to, if you want to talk to Tactical directly, I can hook you up with his email or forward it and put you in contact. You don't have to tell me what it is. You can just be like, I just have something I want to say to Tactical. Or you can say something to me. But yeah, it's kind of like all bets are off. He just told me outside, he said, I'm going to try to open up about this part. This has been the part that I think caused him the most anxiety about doing this. But at the same time, we're hoping that by him sharing his story, two things happen. One, people who are ready to choose life and to choose a new direction find a way to take the first step and then the second step. And the second thing is, if you have somebody in your life with PTSD, hopefully this helps you understand a little bit about why you may be frustrated they're not sharing with you, but they're not sharing with you even though they love you. And the only thing you can really do is love them back in that situation. Because like if they're not ready to talk, they're not ready to talk. They may never be ready to talk about something, and that's okay. That may not be necessary for their healing journey. But I know after working with Tactical here for years, we communicate a lot better now than we used to. And part of that is I let go of that frustration when I would ask a question and he just would walk away. But also he walks away less because he's more cognizant of what's going on there. So we both had to work on that. So Tactical, you're back. What's in that cup?
Coffee for now.
Is it delicious hollow roast coffee?
Yes.
I might have one of those midway through this too. If we go 3 hours today, guys, we're going 3 hours today. I think we were originally going to do this in 2 shows. And I can tell by looking at Tactical that he's going to be a much happier man if we get through the whole thing.
Probably.
But 5-minute breaks have to happen because my bladder is like this big. So.
Yeah, I can only go about an hour at a time anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's because of your back injury. That's a whole different thing. Okay, so you get back. You get out of the military. You meet somebody and marry her.
Yep.
And you follow the formula that's been laid out for you in life. Were you still Christian at that point? Oh, he of the name Christian?
Yes.
Okay. So you were still
Christian, went to church on Sunday.
Yep. Did that give you comfort?
In this regards, no.
Okay. Honesty is good.
I mean, I believe the Bible, believe in God, all of it. But that was, I mean, I went to church on Sunday. I did not spend any real extra time praying, reading the Bible, anything like that. So it was just part of my identity, I guess.
Yeah, it was a habit.
Yeah.
And this would be what I would start the start of your sink to rock bottom.
Yeah.
You didn't know it, but you were making bad decisions already.
Yes.
You married the wrong person. What else did you do that was bad? A bad decision.
I mean, I got out, I worked one job that absolutely sucked. I was miserable. I hated it.
Did you hate everything yet?
Not at that point,
Okay.
but wound up moving back to Mississippi because I had 3 jobs lined up. The day my dad was supposed to fly back or fly out to California to help me drive back was the day Katrina hit New Orleans. So I wound up staying in California an extra 2 weeks. Finally made the drive back on my own. And during that 2-week period, all 3 jobs fell through. So I had, I think, $14 in my bank account at this point, which the only option to get that $14 was to hit an ATM, which I couldn't do because it was less than 20. So I had $14 to my name that I couldn't get to. And finally, my grandmother's neighbor told my grandmother, who told my mother, who told me that I should talk to this guy out at Camp Shelby. And I walked in, gave him my resume. He didn't look up from his computer. He finally looks at my resume, looks up at me, looks back at my resume, and he says, "You any ken of Ray Kaler?" I'm like, oh God. Because this is Camp Shelby. It's Mississippi National Guard. And if you're not aware, there's a good old boys club there. And you're either in it or you're not. So at this point, it's like, when I answer this question, I either have this job or I don't. And I said, yes, sir, that'd be my uncle. Yeah, I used to be drinking buddies with Ray. And I was like, oh, thank God I got this job. And it was not an immediate thing, but I did wind up getting a job there. And once again, I was miserable because I was bored out of my mind. Most people would have loved this job because 90% of the time there was nothing to do, but I had to be there. And so I finally was like, I'm going to join the Coast Guard Reserve just so I can get some form of retirement. And then about halfway through the process of doing that, I asked the recruiter if he could switch my package to active duty because I was just that bored. And I was like, working around civilians sucks. And
I got it. Yeah.
So I wound up going back active duty in 2006.
Okay. So you made some bad decisions, ended up with $14 in your checking account.
Yeah.
Got a job. How much alcohol were you drinking at that time?
At that time, I was not.
Not drinking any alcohol.
No.
And then you joined the Coast Guard. When did you start with the alcohol and why?
I started having a couple of beers with some of my friends while I was in training. And I guess there was a certain level of curiosity there. There was a certain level of the environment. well, there was a lot of level with the environment because only in the military would you take a base with a bunch of 19 to 22, 23-year-old kids and stick them on a base at the back end of nowhere where there is literally nothing to do but drink. So there was that aspect. So that's kind of where that started to become a thing. And I think at that point, consciously, there was still nothing there, but subconsciously, my subconscious was looking for something. And I think that started to fill somewhat of a void that was there. And that's something I don't really fully have a grasp on. It's just something that I do kind of realize was a thing.
So you started drinking casually while
Yeah.
training for the Coast Guard, and then you got out on deployments. How did it happen that you started feeling pain and hate related to what happened in Iraq?
I was out with a couple of friends, and I, to this day, don't know what the trigger point was. But
Because you already had like trigger warnings, thunder.
Yeah.
What other sorts of things would set you off?
I mean, certain social things, some stuff while driving.
Driving at night?
I'm sure that was a thing, even though I didn't really do that much back then. So there was some warning signs there. And then for whatever reason, this particular night, something was a trigger point, and I don't know what it was. But up till then, like, Iraq was just, yeah, I was there. I didn't think about it. I didn't want to think about it.
Did you talk about it?
I absolutely did not talk about it. Like, it may as well have been like your 2005 tax return that's in the attic. Like,
how did you know my 2005 tax return was in the attic?
I didn't.
It's actually probably my 2011 one, but that is where I stashed them before they get burned.
Yeah.
Okay,
but
go ahead.
This particular night, all of a sudden, everything came back at once. And
was it a visual experience for you?
It was a little bit beyond a visual experience.
So like all of a sudden you hadn't really thought about it. You didn't explore memories. You didn't talk about it, and everything poured into your head.
It was like watching a movie in my mind of every bad thing that happened. And for whatever reason, I had a pair of fingernail clippers in my pocket. And I took the file off of, or from the fingernail clippers, and I just started running it across my wrist and digging it in as hard as I possibly could in an attempt to use the physical pain to hold me into reality.
Because you knew that wasn't real, but you knew it wasn't right.
Yeah. And it was literally like I was being sucked into it. And
how did it make you feel?
it was an overwhelming amount of emotion, fear, pain, grief. And I, at some point, actually basically opened up a laceration in my wrist because I had done that enough times that, I had actually sliced myself open with a blunt piece of metal. And I hit a certain point to where my brain just shut down. It just, like, I remember where I was sitting and everything just went black. And I came to for maybe 2 or 3 seconds sitting on a curb outside, and it went black again. And then the next thing I knew, I came to standing in front of a barracks. One of my friends was standing there who had not been there. This is the first recollection I have of him. Fortunately, he was an Army vet that had dealt with these types of situations. So, like, I came to, he said, we're going to medical and you're going to do a self-referral. I was not mentally there, so I just said okay. And wound up going to medical, got transported down to the Portsmouth Naval Hospital and ended up in the psych ward, which was a very fun-filled experience.
Is that sarcasm?
Very much so.
Okay.
This is very much the type of place like you see in the movies. They take everything from your pockets, belt, shoelaces, everything, people in straitjackets. Like, it was like being in some kind of a scene out of a movie, and they put me in this room with windows so I could see out into the ward. And there was a couple of guys standing behind me.
I think those windows were so they could see into your room.
Well, you get the point.
But sure, you could see out. Go ahead.
But there was like a couple of guys standing behind me. No clue what they were there for. Then some psychologist comes in, and I just remember saying anything to get out of that situation. It's like, I will lie, cheat, steal, bribe, whatever I have to do to not be here. Like, anything but here. And I somehow managed to convince them that I was okay enough to not need to stay there. But I was forced to go to counseling for 3 months. And that therapist shot themselves in the foot right off the bat, because as soon as I walked the door, literally the first comment that came out of their mouth was, "I understand." And I just, in my mind, I did not say this out loud, but what my first thought that went through my head was, bitch, you've never worn a pair of combat boots in your life. Exactly what do you understand? Because in my brain, there is no way that she has any concept of what I've been through or what I'm dealing with. You might have read about it in a book, but that does mean nothing.
So she lost credibility and you got nothing out of 3 months of counseling?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
I can remember going in there and just say whatever I had to say to get through that session so I could leave.
So during that time outside of the sessions, having experienced your movie breakdown, were the emotions back after that?
Oh, yeah.
What was that like?
I mean, it was constant, all day, every day stuff in the back of my mind. I kept remembering more and more stuff. And I really did not have anyone to talk to about it. And so I was lost in my own head. And that's when I really started drinking to just get numb.
So how were you sleeping at night?
It depended on the night, but not well. And that's when a lot of the subconscious stuff that I had with, being in certain social situations.
What kind of social situations was bad?
Crowded, what I consider to be, like a bad neighborhood, anything to that nature. Like,
do you like going into music theaters and watching
no,
concerts?
Absolutely not. But before, a lot of that was just in my subconscious, and after that, it was in the forefront of everything.
Did you just feel physical pain? Like, was that still there?
It was a lot of emotional pain, and there's a lot of fear wrapped into it. And when I say that, one thing with PTSD is there is nothing irrational about it. So there's a lot of situations that it makes no sense for you to have any level of concern about something, and you can have extreme anxiety, go into full-on panic attacks, going into fight or flight over sometimes the stupidest things.
Like somebody walking up to you in a grocery store and grabbing your arm?
Oh my God. That one was bad. And it didn't make a lot of sense, but that was one of the hardest triggers that I've had, and that's definitely one of the hardest triggers I've had in a recent time. I had a gut instinct that morning to take the dog with me, and I did not. And I mean, that specific incident, I'd been in therapy, 6 years?
Yep.
So I've developed enough coping skills to where I could kind of deal with that situation, but it was still not good. And
so back to the other times. So you'd had the trigger, you were having more memories come in a pretty constant state of fear, and you didn't know what would trigger you next.
Yeah.
And so you were just afraid to do anything new, I assume.
Yeah, because I mean, at that point, I had nobody talked about PTSD. It was not in the public forefront at all. And there was no YouTube. Or, I mean, we kind of had the internet kind of, but not like we do today. And so I had no idea what would basically set me off.
Did you feel like you were alone in your struggle?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, I had nobody around me that had any concept of what I was dealing with. And my first ship, I don't remember where we pulled into. It was an island somewhere in the Caribbean. And we went out to a bar. And something that night triggered me. and I went downhill fast. And the only thing
What
that
does going downhill fast mean?
Like, my emotional state was just bad. I started shutting down. Like, you could talk to me and I could hear you talking, but nothing registers. And I'm basically getting sucked in tunnel vision on memories and pain. And the only thing anybody there knew how to do was feed me more hard liquor, which was very much the wrong thing to do in that scenario. Yeah. And so it's not like I had anybody that I could talk to. I couldn't Google it. Like, the only thing that I knew how to do was just try to drink enough to numb it.
Did that work?
It works until it doesn't.
How much are you drinking a day?
A lot. I don't even know how much I was drinking then.
Were you drinking more then than you were here?
No, I was probably still drinking less than I did when I finally did get here.
I think your high number was about 24 beers a day.
24 to 30.
Yeah.
If you convert bourbon to beer.
Yeah. So 24 to 30 alcoholic drinks a day, and he's still alive.
Somehow.
Yeah. I think it's your metabolism, which we think is a fast metabolism.
Yeah.
So that back then, it might have been half that, you think?
Yeah, it was more than that. I still, on bad days, I would get home, start in on the beer, and then just start either taking shots or just straight pulls off of a bottle. And if I felt that I needed to, I would increase to get number faster. And I mean, it was...
What were you afraid would happen if you didn't drink?
It's not that I was afraid something would happen. It was just my brain would start to go down rabbit holes of stuff that happened in country, and the pain, the grief, the guilt.
What was the worst out of all of that? Pain, hate, grief, guilt?
I mean, the pain and the guilt, definitely. And it would get to where it was just too much. And so you start drinking faster. And
were you still going to church?
No. At that point in my life, I would get off work, stop wherever I had to stop if I needed to pick up groceries or whatever, and then back to the house so I could start getting numb. And the goal basically just became to either stay numb, or if I had to go to work, be hungover enough to not care. Even if that was a subconscious decision, it's it was the only thing I could find that worked.
Okay. Ken's walking in.
Yes.
We're in the middle of an interview, but come on in. Yeah, no, don't be sorry. Just walk in. You don't need to knock. Okay. So, do you have a question?
I asked about the placement of that door.
Oh,
Center.
center. Yeah, thank you. This is how it is in the holler. There's always something going on, guys. We'll talk about that on Friday.
Yeah.
So you were deep in your cups, and every time you tell me that alcohol works until it doesn't, you almost cry. Why is that?
There's a point where the pain outpaces how fast you can drink. And those are the times when you end up at 1 o'clock in the morning and you cannot drink enough bourbon fast enough to numb the pain. And it's so overwhelming and so intense that you can't bear it. So those are the times that where a 45 hollow point starts to feel like a reasonable off switch.
So you became suicidal.
Yes.
How much were you talking to your family about things like this at this point?
I don't think I was talking to them at all about it.
Why didn't you talk to them?
I didn't talk to anybody about it.
Were you afraid to cause them pain?
I'm sure there was an aspect to that. But there's definitely an aspect. What are you going to say to them? There's this pain, it won't go away. It's so unbearable. I want to put a bullet in my brain pan. Nothing they're going to do is going to change that. I can remember, you hear people say that, oh, that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. When you live that every day for a year, 5 years, a decade, that temporary problem seems pretty permanent. And it doesn't go away. And you just want to turn it off. But there's no off switch. All you can do is try to suppress it. Try to stay numb. try to fill that void with something, anything that's not that. But it just won't go away.
And yet, you want to show us that bullet? Oh, it's there. It's now a necklace that I usually wear, but Tactical's wearing it right now. This is the bullet that was in the gun that he didn't pull the trigger on. What led to you not pulling the trigger? Because he didn't pull the trigger on it, and one day he gave me the bullet. I had it drilled out and turned into a necklace as a reminder that you can choose life. Because we're talking about building freedom in your lives, guys, and it's not very free if you kill yourself.
That was the one that I had allocated. I used to carry 2 full metal jackets first, so I would rack this one into this chamber and sit there and contemplate whether or not to actually finish squeezing that trigger. And I don't have a reason why I never did other than God. That's the only explanation that I can come up with for back then why I didn't. And it wasn't until years after I got here and started actually trying to put effort into making things better that I finally gave that up.
So you carried that around as a reminder.
Yes.
What was it reminding you of?
At this point, that reminds me of where I was and where I am now. I mean, 2 months ago, I couldn't look at that without breaking down. Because it was, at that point, it was still a reminder of the darkness that I was in. And at this point, I am definitely in a very different place.
So we're moving on to part 3 here. Is there anything you want to talk about before we move into what happened to change your life and what you had to do?
I don't think so.
Okay. So during this time when you were drunk and suicidal and scared and alone and not even talking to your family about it because you didn't want to put that on them, and what could they do anyway? You actually, I think, separated from your family quite a bit because of that. What changed?
It was a slow process. I got hit with higher tenure in 2019. So I got involuntarily separated from the military. And I would say at that point, I was already at rock bottom. And since I couldn't go any deeper, I started breaking out the dynamite to make a deeper hole. And, you know, at that point, you know, I lost any form of structure to my day. No job, no responsibilities. So I could get up in the morning and slam 1 or 2 beers while I was making my first cup of coffee. And
When you found out you were going to have to leave the military, how did you feel?
like everything was being taken away from me because it was all I had. All I really had was my job. I was a good mechanic. And any form of camaraderie with anybody else, any kind of structure was all tied up in that. Outside of that, the only thing I had was pain and bourbon. And so when I did get out, that's
I
what
mean,
I
you
was
had
left
friends
with.
too.
I had a lot of friends online. I had a lot of acquaintances where I was. And fortunately, when I did get out, I knew that there was no way I could go home.
Why not?
At the time, I didn't know. I couldn't. And in hindsight, I think there was two primary aspects to that. Because at that point, I was completely consumed in hate. And I've talked to other vets. One specific conversation, you were actually standing there when that happened. I, in passing, mentioned the hate, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. And I think it's very unnatural. But I was just completely consumed in hate. I hated everything. There were days where I would wake up and I would want to set that chair on fire for no other reason than it was there. And so when I got out, the notion of being around parental love was absolutely repulsive. I couldn't be around it. It was uncomfortable. Any kind of love was uncomfortable.
How did you stay here that long if you didn't want to be around love?
I don't know. So, I mean, initially when I got out, I didn't know what I was going to do because I knew I couldn't go home. So I came up with the brilliant idea I'd hike the Appalachian Trail or something, and that never panned out. But fortunately, I mean, you offered me a place to come.
2 trees. I offered you 2 trees.
Yeah. And so I call it my homeless experience because I technically did not have a house. But I got back from overseas, loaded my truck up, drove up here, and lived out of my truck in a hammock for months. And I mean, in hindsight, I think that was one of the first steps of every night just being immersed in nature as opposed to anything else.
So you weren't bar hopping. You weren't
Yeah.
doing any of the normal modern life things. You were in a hammock between 2 trees listening to frogs croak.
Yeah.
And then during the day doing holler things. We were actually working on getting base camp up and running, as I recall, at that time.
Yeah, we were just starting on that.
And I didn't know how dark you were at that time.
I don't think I did either.
Okay. I did know that at your core, you made the right decision.
Yeah.
Like in other situations. So you came here, but I think your first turning point was you didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
I think that's when you chose freedom and life.
Yeah.
And to hang on for over a decade like that had to be crappy.
It was miserable.
Yeah. Were you ever happy in that time at all?
Not really. I mean,
Were you ever happy hanging in the trees in your hammock?
when I got here, yeah, there was some.
What was different about here?
I think it's the environment. I mean, I obviously brought every bad thing with me as far as my mental state, my coping mechanism, which was just bourbon. But there's something about being in God's creation and just that. Like, I love sitting on the screened-in porch, but if you give me a choice between that and going and sitting at the top of the pasture, I'm going to the top of the pasture because there's no man-made anything up there. It's just grass and trees and rabbits and deer and the wind and a gorgeous view. It's just straight the natural environment that we're supposed to be in, as opposed to the concrete blocks that we build.
So the first time you chose life was before you got here. When was the second time you chose life? I have a memory of when I think it was, if that's helpful, but I don't want to put it in you.
Jack's?
Okay, nope. But yeah, tell us about that. There's a third time then.
I remember being at Jack's, and it was the first time, once I had gotten Sunny, my dog,
Mm-hmm.
it was the first time I had been separated from her. And at the time, I obviously had no idea why, but I just remember being there and all I wanted was my dog. And when I think back on that now, she's the first place that I found love. or at least a love that felt like I could accept.
Tell us about that, because a lot of people love you, but it doesn't matter if you don't think you can accept it.
I mean, I always said that, yes, I was raised in Mississippi. I was raised to be a very nice person, but I'm also career military, which means I'm a trained asshole. And I had that part mastered. And, you know, when you deal with the kind of hate that I had to deal with, you do a lot of things that you regret. And so one of the biggest struggles that I've had since I actually started trying to make things better was accepting anything good for me. And I think the first place I was able to actually do that was Sunny. And then we go to Jack's, and I was separated from that. And it just made me hurt. And that was the point when you asked if I would go to the VA. And desperation breeds action. And I was desperate enough that I said yes.
Leading to the following scenes, my friends. We get back from Jack's after driving 14 freaking hours in his truck with three of us, where one of us had to be in the back seat, which didn't have leg room, so you just had to lay down in the back seat.
Yeah.
And we rotated who that was, but nobody was comfortable when he got home. He yelled at me when we got back about my suitcase or something dumb, and then felt guilty about it. I remember you're like, "I'm so sorry I yelled at you." I was like, "It's okay. We were all grumpy that day. We all get grumpy." So the next day, I'm like, "Okay, this VA thing's got to happen," because I was afraid you were going to do something to yourself that would be permanent. And so I have the forms I've printed out from online, and we have a friend who connected us with that.
Yeah.
That was probably Oxy.
Probably.
And so he has to fill out the forms. How does your mental state and your PTSD impact your ability to read and understand forms?
Not very well at all.
He can't. He like literally can't. And people will be like, "Well, that's an over dramatization." Not. I don't know what it is about forms particularly.
Especially back then.
Yeah, and especially back then. So I'm sitting there. I have them printed out. I'm like, I can fill out a form. I have a pen. Name. Long rant about why he's irritated. He has to fill out the form and put his name on the form, and they should know his name. Be that as it may. What is your name? Fine name. You know, different pieces of it. It wasn't on the name one, but it'd be like, you know, what happened. The other part is that form asks you what happened to cause you to have problems. And the last thing he wanted to do was tell anybody what happened to cause him to have problems. He didn't even tell us today what happened to cause him to have problems, really. He told us some things.
Yeah.
And that was him trying to tell us. So it's at my dining room table. We're across the table, and it is the most hate-filled, mean-sounding conversation we've ever, like, and my mom's here watching it. She's like watching a tennis match. And then we get done with the forms, and that means we're ready to go take him to the American Legion, who helped us. And you walked out, and I don't know what you did for the rest of the day. And Mom was like, "Are you okay, Nicole?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no, that didn't hurt me at all. He just needed somebody to yell back at him, or else he wasn't going to do it."
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how you were then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a turning point. And the American Legion got him services faster than anybody had a right. Like we started, and within 30 days, you had a start, and
Yeah.
within 60 days, you had your rating. And when I tell people that timeline, they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
So I think there was another force there helping you get that because you
Yes.
needed that. So when was the third time you chose life?
So there was also the aspect of the VA that didn't help.
Yeah, the VA is a really frustrating organization to try to work with or get any help from. But you'll spend a lot of time doing it and filling out forms.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. Actually, we have a friend who's a master at it, which was helpful to us. But
Yeah.
I don't believe that the way it's set up is intended to get veterans services. It's intended to keep veterans from getting services, as near as I can tell. Not talking about the people who work there with the veterans. I'm just talking
Yeah.
about overall structure.
The
Like
system.
they do better if they don't have to spend the money. Oops. There went my water. That's the third time I've spilled my water today. So
I don't remember what the trigger was.
let me tell you what the trigger was, because I think we're talking about the same thing now. We had worked with the VA to get you a psychologist, and every time we went in there, they wanted two things. One, they wanted you to join AA or commit yourself to a detox center where you could not bring your dog. So that was off the table for you.
Well, alcohol and a dog.
And they wanted you to start taking psychotropic drugs. And you would always say, I am willing to consider giving up alcohol if I have access to a psychiatrist to help me deal with other coping mechanisms for this. You would say that in tactical words. So I'm using different slightly, but basically, I mean, and it wasn't mean. You wouldn't say it mean. And both the substance abuse and and if I'm going to take psychotropic drugs, I want to be under the advisement of a psychiatrist. And they'd say something like, you have to take this 6-week class once a week before we can give you that. Or you have to be evaluated by this person before we can give you that. And every time you would think you were going to get an appointment with us, your first appointment to start talking to somebody about being able to do something different than what you're doing to deal with your pain so that you did not actually kill yourself, right?
Yeah.
They would tell you another thing you had to do and then rip the rug out from under you until the day happened where you had an appointment scheduled. This is 2020, guys. So we got, craziness about people not wanting to be around people. He has a thing scheduled to go see the psychiatrist finally. He's gone through all the hoops, and they call and they cancel his appointment because 2020. And they're like, 6 months from now, we might be willing to see you. And you took an 18-pack of beer and you just started pouring it straight down your throat. And I sent you away to David Booty's.
That was why I went there.
Because I knew whatever I had to give, I couldn't give, but he could give.
Yeah.
And somebody else drove you because you could not drive.
Oh, no.
Nighthawk drove you.
Yeah.
And you went and you talked to David. And you came back. And you passed out, actually.
Yeah.
On my front deck. And then you woke up.
I was wrecked.
Yeah, you woke up and I looked at you and I asked you a question. Do you remember what that question was?
Something about paying out of pocket.
I asked you if you were willing to pay a psychiatrist out of your own pocket rather than trying to get the VA to pay. What'd you say?
I don't remember, but I remember I was willing to try anything at that point.
You said yes. And then you actually, I don't think you drank anymore that day.
I might not have.
I don't think you did. I think you kind of chilled out and went to bed.
I mean, I probably just went to bed.
Yeah. And then what followed, what I knew from talking to other people was when you have somebody in your state, I can't expect you to call the psychiatrist to make the appointment. So I called.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were not willing to see you because of the PTSD. And because you did deserve VA benefits, and they were like, yeah, we're not touching that.
Yeah.
And it was a Saturday the next day. And Jenny walked up my driveway to visit because she was in her year of Connect, I think, or
Yeah.
something like that. And I looked at her and I said, he's finally willing to just pay out of pocket. And she said, I have a friend who just moved to Cookeville, Tennessee, who's a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. I can text her right now if you want. And you saw her that Thursday, I believe.
It was quick.
Yeah. And the first thing she didn't say to you is that she understood.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all those pieces coming together?
I still think the only explanation when I sit back and because it goes well back beyond just that. The first pieces I can put in place for then to now started in like 2012 to get me to here. And the only explanation I have is God. Because it was not, when you look at the fact that this is where I ended up of all places in the country, anywhere I could have gone, how fast I was able to get the rating through the VA, the fact that the day after I agree to start seeing a private therapist, one gets dropped in my lap.
That was 6 years ago, almost 5 years ago. 5 years ago.
Something like that.
Are you still seeing the same therapist?
Yes. Tomorrow, actually.
Tomorrow. How was your pain and hate for the first couple years of seeing her?
It was still bad. I mean, we started with I can remember when I first started seeing her. I think every time that I saw her, we were talking about who was in control, me or the hate. And every day was a fight for control. And it sucked. And I can remember telling her, I just want to be able to pretend to be a normal person.
Mm-hmm.
I know I never will be, but I just wanted to be able to pretend. But that was a starting point. And so she started by harping on me about getting into a routine.
Yeah, I'm glad you finally listened to her 6 weeks ago.
I vehemently opposed that.
For 5 years, he didn't do it.
I got into kind of a routine eventually. After like a year or two.
The best part is it's like he goes, she says, get in a routine, and then he comes back, and I'm sure what she was doing was like, so how did your routine go? And he was like, I didn't do it, because he won't lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, she started with some stuff like that and started working on some other coping skills. And eventually it started to get to a point to where I could have a reasonable reaction to something by my standards. I'm sure you remember the turkey.
Yeah.
I've still got that shotgun shell sitting on my desk in the cabin.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the first time I maintained some level of control.
That was the last time we asked you to shoot an animal here.
No, it's not.
No, I didn't ask you to shoot any other animal here. You have shot other animals here by your own choosing. But yeah, he shot a turkey and then
Baghdad.
walked away. And Nighthawk and I processed the turkey, and then you showed back up.
Yeah, and that time was not the greatest response ever, but what I did not do was dive straight into a bottle of bourbon and stay drunk for 4 days.
Right.
I actually went through some stuff to have a reasonable thing, and I think about the time y'all were done was about the time that I was composed myself enough to be able to come back out.
Yes, and then we talked about that being a trigger and you not being involved in that part of processing.
Yeah.
And every time we've processed something, you have walked away completely for that part.
Yeah.
With the exception that this year you did. We had an animal that had to be put down. And there was nobody around to ask to help.
Yeah. And that took a lot of effort.
And I was going to do it. And you're like, no, I need to do this. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. So that was definitely another step in the direction.
So tell us what it took for you to get past your alcohol addiction. And why going straight into a 12-step program at AA was not going to work, even though the VA really wanted you to do that.
Yeah. My thing with the VA on that was I have one coping mechanism.
You have one arrow in your quiver.
Yes.
Alcohol.
And you want me to give that up so that you can eventually replace it with something else? Maybe, possibly. And there's a chance that what you replace it with might or might not. No. Absolutely not. And so I think it had to have been 2 years with my current.
It was 1 year.
Was it one?
It was about a year, yeah.
It was a while working with my current therapist before I would even consider it. And then, of course, by that point in time, I had been using alcohol for so much, for so long, that it had become its own problem, which took a while to break.
You started quitting a year before the time you actually quit forever.
Yeah.
It took you about a year. And at that point, AA was big for you because you could stream the meetings.
Yeah.
But you didn't take that step until you had other coping mechanisms for the emotional part.
Yeah.
And so you needed to see a psychologist before you could even consider quitting.
And it was, for that, it was getting other stuff to be able to replace the alcohol.
Well, then admitting that you wanted to give it up, because it was also wrapped up in your personality, which is a problem with addiction, where it's like, also I'm cool because I do this drug.
Yeah, and that had become its own issue.
Yeah.
So I mean, the AA thing was definitely a good stepping stone when I hit that point. So, I mean, it wasn't everything that I needed at that point, but it was a good start.
Yeah, and then you started going to a church-based one.
Yes.
And you started going to church.
Kind of.
And I went out of town and you felt spiritually attacked. That time I went to Patrick's and the bugs were found in the pig feed.
I'm trying to remember that one.
Oh, yeah. That was the time where I left and everything went wrong.
I think I vaguely remember.
You actually, I
which one
think
you're
you started
talking about.
drinking again, or you were drinking before I left. But you were trying to quit, but you hadn't steadily done that. And you told me later that night that you were being attacked by demons.
That's not surprising.
Yeah. And that was something that would happen. I would leave you here alone being one of your triggers.
Yeah.
And you would have problems come up.
It seemed like every time. Take a break.
Do you need a quick break?
5 minutes.
Okay, guys, we're taking 5 minutes because he needs a break. We're very close to the end of the rebuilding story.
Okay.
Be right back, guys. Hang in there. Thanks for hanging with me. You guys could go take your break too. I just want to thank everybody who has stayed on a 3 hour, almost, well, 2 hour and 16-minute live stream to hear this story because it's a long one. And that's why we were originally going to go less long.
Parts.
Tactical just got a mental reset. He said he needed to go out. You know how dogs like shake it off? He had to go shake it off.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So the first thing you did, we're back to how have you built into a more functional, happy life? Because would you say your life is fairly happy now?
Yes.
Yes. How long have you been happy?
It's grown over time, but I think that started when I got sober, and it's grown from there.
So the chemical haze that happens from drugs can keep you from dealing with emotions, and emotions are hard to deal with. So that makes sense. And I know like the marked difference in you when you quit drinking. So if you had kept drinking, I think you would be dead now from poisoning your liver.
Probably.
Your skin was the wrong color. You already had liver indicators in your medical stuff that you were prescribed something to help bring your liver enzymes down.
Yeah.
And
I mean, even when I gave that round up,
yeah,
I was still in a mental state that I was ready to die.
yeah.
And so if I couldn't use that, I was just going to drink myself to death.
And you were doing a good job of it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And what it took for you, and I'm paraphrasing and try to get you to start telling your story again, was to see a psychologist, start dealing with things, start finding ways to deal with the scarier parts of PTSD. And there's one symptom of your PTSD we haven't talked about. So I know that during your time giving up alcohol, at one point you thought I was an illusion. Tell us about that and why did you think you wondered if I even was a real person?
Yeah,
What's that about?
One of the fun-filled parts of my PTSD is it comes with hallucinations. And
y'all are hallucinating too if he's hallucinating me. So you guys are having a shared hallucination.
Yeah. And I used to think that was normal. Like everybody had that. And then I realized that my level of hallucinations is not normal. And one of the more fun-filled examples of that was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to the sound of somebody kicking a bunch of metal pots and pans around on my kitchen floor. And I started to climb out of bed with the intention that something was about to die when I realized that the dog was still asleep. And so I sat there for a minute listening to this while staring at a dog that, if you've ever met my dog, if she walks up to the cabin, Sunny's going to bark and let me know that somebody just walked up, even though she knows full well it was Nicole. So some random dude kicking pots and pans around on my floor, my dog would lose her mind.
I mean, not to mention, why would you kick pots and pans around somebody's kitchen? There's that, rather than just,
So when I say all of that to illustrate my reality or lack thereof sometimes. And it really set in when I was driving back with somebody and I saw something and I had to ask the question, was that real?
What was their answer?
Fortunately, yes. They saw it too. But I have gotten far enough down that rabbit hole to where at one point it was like, well, if this wasn't real, what was? What is?
Mhm.
Like, is my dog real? Is Nicole real? Like, I don't know. What's my indicator to that? Like, so I had to go through that thought process, which sucked.
Yeah.
And I think that was, I don't remember when that was actually.
You kind of remembered yesterday, but you do have short-term memory issues, so
Yeah.
sometimes things move around a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you finally quit drinking, you had to go through like this, I can stop drinking, I can have 1 beer a day thing. That didn't work. Okay, I'm going to stop for realsies for 6 weeks, and then I can have 1 beer a day, and that didn't work. Okay, if I just have 1 cold beer and 5 warm ones, I'll only drink the cold beer. Did that work?
No.
No. And then there was a day, and I had just been at Jack's. I came home, and you were sitting there. Mom was here at that same table I made you fill out paperwork at, and you looked a little glum. Mom's like, "What's wrong?" You're like, "Well, I need to take a dump run." I was like, "Well, why do you look glum?" And you were like, "Because when I take a dump run, it's an excuse for me to dump the stuff. And if I get to the intersection after the dumpster, I can turn left and go buy beer, or I can turn right and come home. And I'm afraid I'm going to turn left and go buy beer." Mom goes, "Do you want me to go with you?" And you said, "No." And I go, "Well, do you want me to come with you?" And you said, you didn't say yes. You said, you either said that would be nice or you could. You said something non-committal.
I did not say yes, but I didn't say no either.
Right, which means yes. This is the other thing. The redneck version of yes does not involve the word yes, because he doesn't deserve anything good for himself, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I jumped in the car and we went to the dumpster and we got to that intersection. Which way did you turn?
Right.
That's the last time you had a drink. Was that day?
That would have been December 1st.
Yeah. I think it was 2022.
Yeah.
It might have been 2021. 2020? Nope, it was 2022.
So to back up a couple of days before that, I had played the AA game for a while, and not going to say it didn't help, but I knew it wasn't what I needed. And so I found another group at a church up the road and was going there. And at this point, like, I had gone and then stopped, and then like I'd go occasionally. And at this point, I was going every day to their 12 o'clock meeting. And most of the time, that was my excuse to leave the house to buy beer. So I'd go to the meeting and I'd stop on the way back and pick up a 6-pack. And I was driving back one day. It's like, I know that I'm supposed to be here, but there's something just awkward about it. It's just uncomfortable. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what it was. And I remember roughly about where I was on Dale Ridge coming back. And it finally dawned on me it was love. And I realized that the people there had love. And the worst part about it is they shoved it in my direction. And I didn't like it. And I was like, I'm going to be blunt. I was like, that's some bullshit. There's something I love. I was like, fine, I'll make a list. It was like, and I came up with nothing. And being a good engineer, it's like, all right, I can work around this. If I can't come up with a list of things I love, I'll make a list of things I don't hate. Works. I'm pretty sure I don't hate my dog. And by the time I got home, that was the entire list. I was pretty sure that I didn't hate my dog. Everything else, including myself, I despised. And so that was the day that I realized that if I was going to break the hate, I had to learn to love again. So one of the things, I think this is one of the first things I did when I actually started, like, actually legitimately trying to get into a routine again. There's a biblical scholar that I listen to, and he always said that him and his wife never go to bed angry. If there's something, they always work it out. And it's like, well, I don't hate my dog. So the last part of my routine always became right before I get in bed, I would go sit on the floor and pet my dog to try to not go to bed angry. And it started working. And that was one of the first key parts with my routine. And it helped to start breaking that. And then I think one of the next things that was probably the sheep. Unless I missed something else.
What about the sheep?
That was good and painful at the same time because we went into a 3-month drought when we got
Well,
the
okay,
sheep.
so let's talk about why did you get sheep? What about this environment led you to be able to get these sheep?
I really don't remember much of any of the conversations that led up to getting the sheep.
But you had them with people, and how did you find people?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that was also around the time. I think that was around the time we started doing SF, wasn't it?
So I think what you found here was a community,
Yeah.
not just SRF, but just the people in the wider LFTN community were people you liked hanging out with, and you'd like go to their houses and help them do stuff,
Yes.
even though you hated everything.
Yes.
Yes.
So, I mean, definitely that was another. I mean, that kind of goes back to. That part goes back to Zello, really,
Mm-hmm.
which was 2016 when I started developing some of the relationships on there. And then, once I did actually get out and I got here, a lot of that just took off with, our friendship and the rest of the GSD crew. And then, some of the wider network that we have here in Tennessee, as well as some of the other stuff with the workshop and with SRF and the people that come in for those. So that was definitely an aspect of developing real relationships with people as opposed to
Drinking buddies.
drinking buddies, acquaintances, co-workers. you know, a lot of the people that I hung around with before, it was forced or best out of available options, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Not that they weren't uncool people to hang around, but probably some of them, it was not the kind of crowd that I would have been hanging around if I had had other options.
So we decided we wanted to get sheep, and we were talking about that here. And it was SRF 1 or 2. You're walking around and you said something about sheep, and Dawn's like, well, I got to get rid of my sheep. And that's how we got the sheep.
Yeah.
So it was like literally somebody heard you talking in passing, or you heard somebody talking in passing.
Yeah.
And then there were sheep. And then there was no rain for like 400 years. It was the great drought year that started in June.
But like there was an aspect before that of kind of doing some things around here, but I think that was getting the sheep was really the first sense of actual purpose that I had since I had gotten out. It gave me a reason to actually get up and do stuff. And then,
Do you think you would have found that purpose had you not given up drinking before?
no.
So you had to give up drinking, spend time with a psychologist, and then you found a purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't do it the other way, but I mean, just that's the way it planned out for me. And I mean, that was also a couple of months after I had stopped drinking, and the amount of effort that it took.
6 months.
Yeah.
You'd been sober for 6 months, I think, at least.
So the amount of effort that it took to be able to move them for, I think it was the first 8 months, was insane.
We're talking like you got to pre-drill the hole to put the step-in post in sort of hard. Yeah, it
walking
sucked.
around with a 5-gallon bucket of water to try to soften the ground up enough so you can stick a 4-inch
Get
spike
sheep,
in the ground.
they said. It will be easy, they said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that definitely gave me some sense of a purpose again. And each of these things was just, you know, one step in a direction moving towards something better.
Right. Well, you also got your head right one step at a time. And when that happened, an opportunity would come. And because your head was already looking for an opportunity, it would see it.
Yes.
And then you took the step to take advantage of it.
Yes.
So never underestimate that.
Yeah.
Like you had to work.
Yeah. I mean, there was, and that's the thing about it, is all of it is work. It's every bit of the last 6 years, like it required me to do something, and there's other people that have absolutely helped, but I mean, how long did you think that I needed to go to the VA before I actually went? Like, I think you knew that I needed to be seeing somebody long before I ever moved here.
I knew you needed to quit drinking, but
That
only you
too.
could decide. And I
Yeah.
knew for you to do that, you needed to see somebody.
Yeah. So every aspect of it requires effort on your part.
So you
And-
got the sheep, and That gave you a sense of purpose.
Yes.
How did that help you love better?
It was a stepping stone. I was already putting in, effort in that direction, and it was still a fight for control a lot of times. And I remember one of the SRFs we did in October, and I was supposed to be leaving. I don't know who was standing there when you got one of the most epic rants I've ever gone on.
It had some F's in it for sure.
Yeah. And
Threats to shoot dogs, I think, also happened.
I was on the edge of full-on rage, ready to shoot the dogs because they kept going through the fence, and I was over it. I was hot. I was tired. I was not supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in Camden already. And I was fighting with everything I had to maintain enough control to not shoot the dog. And I heard something say, "Look up." And when I did look up, I was looking down the pasture, because our pasture goes up like 500 feet in elevation over the course of 305 yards. So it's steep.
I
Just
think
a
it's
little
funny
bit.
you know the numbers, actually. I just know
did
it's steep. He knows exactly how steep it is.
I shot it with a rangefinder.
Yeah.
But I was looking down the pasture at everything that I had cleared for fence lines and everything the sheep had eaten through. And behind me was a gnarled mess of blackberry vines and a miserable hellscape. But what was in front of me was actually beautiful. And so I just stopped what I was doing, got back on my four-wheeler, went the rest of the way up to the top of the pasture, and I just sat there and I was looking down the pasture, and then I realized that from that vantage point, I was basically sitting on one ridge, looking down to the bottom and across to the other ridge. And the rage began to subside, and I started to feel a sense of peace. And then I finally, once I had calmed down enough and I was sitting there, started to think about what I was going to do with dogs. And that's when I realized from that vantage point why the dogs kept going through the fence. And I was able to go back down, get them into where they were supposed to be, walk them over to another area and gave them a place to be. And then after that, I was able to call it good and leave. But that was something else that started for me where, that was another coping skill, was for me when I'm starting to get into those mindsets or whatever. I need to find that sense of peace. It's like I will go find a spot like that where I could just sit and be there. And there is something about just sitting in pure nature that is very different than anything else. And it's almost like petting my dog, where it's hard to be angry while petting your dog. It's hard to be angry while you're sitting in something that pure.
So you started spending time at some different spots where you go to reset in nature. You have a creek spot and the pasture spot and the back of the property spot. And while there, you started, like, if there were trees around that needed to be pulled out, you like started noticing erosion problems and fixing it.
Yeah.
Just by putting piles of brush there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like, I'd go back, walking back up the wash, and it's like, well, that's an erosion problem, and there's a dead tree here, so I'll kick the tree over and, basically make a little miniature beaver dam that slows the water down.
When did you start caring about your future?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. There wasn't a day that I would notice that you started actually caring about your future or talking about the fact you might have a future.
I think it was definitely gradual.
Yeah. Once you started caring about having a future, you started taking more steps.
Yeah.
But every year you would go to the dark place around April.
That's, yeah. Every year.
And it was not as dark as it used to be. Every year it was less dark, but it was still dark.
Yeah.
And this year you went there again, didn't you?
Yep.
What'd you do? Did you realize you were going to a dark place and fight? Did you just go with it? Like, what was that? Because just because you've addressed things doesn't mean that things don't come back up.
No, it absolutely will come back up. And I was kind of blindsided by it this year because I wasn't expecting
Yeah, because it had such a good year.
Yeah, I mean, like, February and March had
It's like
been
you didn't even want
good.
alcohol anymore. Now it's like you see people drinking and you don't care.
Yeah. And I don't know why, but all of a sudden I just got hit with stuff, and it was like a Monday or a Tuesday, and I went to drive to the dump, and I went through Monday and Tuesday, I went through all the stages of PTSD, and like within 36 hours.
That was the same week that I lost time on my walk, by the way.
It's not surprising at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. That was a weird week.
It was definitely a weird week. And then, I mean, that took me 2 or 3 weeks to start to come off of that. And then
Well, and then in April, we always have the spring workshop coming, and you were working at like 25% efficiency for
if
weeks.
that,
Yeah, you were not. You were just not.
and I felt bad.
Well, whatever.
I mean, I knew I was barely functional.
I had other functional people here help me.
Yeah, but I still felt bad about it. But I mean, it does. I mean, it's a perfect illustration of, yes, there was a point in my life where there were no good days. And I can remember some of the early conversations with my therapist about having 2 good days this week, which was weird but unheard of. Like, there were no good days before. And so the fact that I had 2 good days, and then, finally up to a point to where, yeah, I can have a couple of good weeks. I'm gonna get slammed back down at some point. And then there's other times, I mean, I just went through 3 panic attacks in like 16 hours, but that, developed enough now that sucked when I went through it. And it was rough. But after it was over, it's like, okay, I'm going to the pasture to clear my head. Okay, my nerves are still shot. Let me go make a tea with a specific blend that I know is going to calm my nerves down. And I can go through steps to where it doesn't take me 2 weeks to get back on my feet again and become functional again. But all of that was learned. And most all of it was learned through experience and through trial and error. And not everything that I tried worked. And it's still a fight. But it's a fight. It is a fight worth fighting.
You want to share more?
Let's go for it.
Go for it.
I mean, do you have something in mind?
So you hit the skids again in April.
Yep.
And what happened is that Matt invited you to church, I'm pretty sure. Is that why you started going to that church?
I'm trying to remember. No, I had run into him. He came out for the.
Yeah, he came out and you guys started talking about God.
We started talking.
Yeah.
And he said he was going out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was after the workshop.
It was after the workshop. I went out of town and you were grappling hard with.
I was reeling really hard.
Yeah, with the hate and with other like things. And I asked you like the weekend before, I was like, "Why do you want to go to church?" Because formerly you had gone to church and you hadn't been going to church. So, and you were like, "No." And then right on my way out the door, you were starting to have messages from God, basically. You were starting to address some of your issues with scripture.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that. And you came up to me out like it was the day I was kind of packing up to leave by, I don't remember, like we weren't in a hurry to get out the door because we were going 5 hours and then a hotel and then the rest of the way. And you said, I figured it out. When I'm around you, I feel peace.
Yeah.
And that's what led to what happened while I was out of town, by the way, was you said the word peace. It triggered that whole thing. And then I walked into the bedroom before I left and you had just gotten, like you do this thing for me every time you redneck architect the packing of the car.
Yeah.
You're really good at that because you process things visually, which is actually probably why you have the delusion thing, because you process things visually. And I don't know what had me do it, but I grabbed that bullet and Mom was off somewhere.
Yeah.
And you looked like you were in a bad place. But I was like, are you and I almost didn't go on this trip.
Yeah.
I was like, I will stay here because you're important. And you're like, no, go. I think I could use a few days alone anyway. And I handed you the bullet and I said, remember that you chose life. Do you remember me doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you took it. And then we left.
And that was the trip where I was supposed to do the podcast, right?
Yeah. So that was like a Wednesday I left, then Thursday got where I was going. You were hijacking my podcast Friday, but I was hopping on from Midwest Preparedness, actually. That's where I was.
Yeah.
And you were not very communicative at first.
I was reeling.
So tell us what happened while I was gone.
I was reeling pretty hard. And at first I thought it was just the PTSD. It had all the signs of PTSD. And Friday rolls around. I'm supposed to be hijacking the podcast, and I was just getting hit with this guttural fear for no reason whatsoever. And it was like, this is not just PTSD. This is something added on top of that. And it was like 10 minutes before I was supposed to go live for Friday's show. I sat down outside with a cup of coffee and I prayed and was like, God, I need like an hour of peace and calm so I can get through this.
The show.
The show.
Yeah.
Like, I need an hour. Just give me an hour so that I can do this show, because I've been left with a piece of responsibility and I need to do a good job.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to tell Nicole
For that.
you're doing your show today, Nicole.
Yeah.
No, wouldn't want to do that.
And much to my surprise, God responded and said, this is how I feel about you. And he dropped the weight of his heart on top of me. And I saw two things when that happened. I saw love from the perspective of a father that will override anything that the child has done. And I also saw the pain of the father's heart being separated from his child. And it crushed me. And I suppressed it as fast as I possibly could because I was on mission. I was supposed to be doing this podcast. And so I pushed it down, and I don't know if that podcast sucked or not.
It was a short one.
I managed to get through it, and I walked out and I tried to start throwing trash in the back of the truck to make a dump run, and it started welling up on top of me and I couldn't take it. And so I jumped on a four-wheeler and I went over to the pasture. And I sat at the top. And I just cried.
Did you start feeling love for things at that time?
Yes.
Was that what made you really flip?
My perspective on everything flipped in that moment. There was an aspect of, I understand the concept of forgiveness and all of that, but I could never accept it.
So it's forgiveness for everybody but you. It was.
It was forgiveness for me as well, but that also requires me to accept it, and I couldn't. And it wasn't until I saw the reason for me to accept it that I could. And from that moment, I can't look at anything the same way that I used to.
So what's the rage and hate like now?
It's still there.
That's right. It's not just gone, guys. I know you thought we were going to go there. Nope. It's still there, huh?
It was fighting to come back yesterday.
Yeah, it was.
It was fighting hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I took the time to do everything that I needed to do. And I fought back. And by the grace of God, I can say that I'm actually in control.
So what does that mean for building the life you want, do you think? Do you still have more to do?
There's always more to do. I don't know exactly where things are going from here, but I know things are getting better. I'm getting better. For the first time in over 2 decades. I can feel love, something besides hate and pain. And it's still there. I mean, you saw it today. But I'm surrounded by friends
You've reconnected with your family.
who will be here next week.
Yeah. Like he's been trying to reconnect with his family-ish, but he's like, I think, really reconnected.
Yeah.
Since.
And, you know, going to church again, actually reading the Bible like I should have been the entire time. My aspect of doing things that I don't want to do has changed because nobody wants to scoop the litter box.
Nobody wants to scoop the litter box. If you get nothing out of this show, just know nobody wants to scoop the litter box.
But there's an aspect of it that, you know, we've been working on the routine so that we overlap. And there are times where it's like, I know that me scooping the litter box takes something off of your plate on a day where you're trying to go live for something big or whatever's going on. So it's like, I don't mind like coming in here and doing some of the things that I don't want to. So my perspective on everything has changed in the last month and a half.
It's funny that you go to scooping the litter box as your example. Something I try to keep off your plate as much as possible.
It's the first thing that sprung to mind.
Yeah, it's the one thing none of us wanted to do. Pack Rat says truth. Nobody wants to scoop the litter box. So I think had you not taken a step at a time, you wouldn't have been ready to feel love. And I think feeling love has, this is just my observation, has made it so that you are making stronger relationships with the people around you that have always been good friends.
Yeah.
reconnecting with your family, and from that place of community, you're looking towards more of a future, more of a
Absolutely.
purpose. Like you're finding your purpose. If you could say what your purpose is right now, do you know what it is?
Not really.
Do you have any inkling of sort of what it might be, or is it not even?
I know that we're building some form of community within what we're doing here, and
Why is that community important? By community, it's we don't mean commune, guys. We're talking about the
yes,
community around us, which overlaps with TSP, Self Reliance Festival, LFTN, and people who come through here for whatever reason.
and a bunch of other places that we're going.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know exactly what my purpose in life is, but I feel like it's enabling a lot of that. And, you know, one of my favorite things with, well, I had somebody at one of the workshops ask me why I was willing to put all of the effort into doing that. And I used that person as an example because I was like, when you showed up here, this, that, and the other, and now your perspective is different. And I get to watch that happen with people over and over and over again. And when I get to watch somebody change their life for the better, it makes doing events like this worth it. And it makes the effort that we put into it worth it. And as much as I can enable stuff like that to happen, then yeah, absolutely.
If you had it to do all over again, would you still join the military as young tactical going into the Marines for the first time?
I've never actually thought about that.
That's why I assaulted you with that question with no warning. In fact, we'll get the real answer now.
Probably.
Probably why? Even though all that pain has happened.
Our life is based on the experience of what it has been before. I've used the example that hate and love are the opposite sides of a pendulum. Most people don't hate that much. That also means that they don't swing that far to the other side of the pendulum. I've experienced the extreme side of hate. So I can understand the extreme side of love. So when God dumped his heart on top of me, I was able to feel and fully appreciate that. If I had not lived through whatever it was, 15 years of hell, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate that. So, no, I wouldn't change it.
Okay. I'm not surprised to hear you say that, actually. I thought that's what you were going to say. I have a couple starred things. So Tori says, tactical, what would you say to other men your age who have alcohol or anger concerns? And what about, so start with that. So men your age who have similar things going on, who may be trying to fight it, but not feeling like they're making headway or don't even know they need to fight it.
Both of those things are usually symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
They're symptoms of an underlying problem. And just based on my own experience and observing a lot of other people and similar stuff, you have to get down to the core issue if you're going to fix either of the others. I would not have drank like I did if it wasn't for the PTSD. I would not have been as angry as I was if it wasn't for the PTSD. So until I fix the PTSD part, the other stuff doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want with that, and it's not going to change anything. If you do manage to break the alcohol, then you're going to fill that void with something else because you haven't fixed the underlying problem. And I've seen so many people that get stuck in AA for 30 years, and they're still, every meeting they go to, it's like, God, I wish I could have a beer or a bourbon or whatever. And it's because you haven't fixed the underlying thing. So until you deal with that part, then yeah.
Interesting. It's because I reflect that in a different thing, but I'm not going to share that story this moment.
Okay.
I'll share it somewhere else because this is about you. Okay. And what about the young men or teens out there who, I don't know if that means, what would you say to young men and teens who maybe haven't gone down the road yet of addiction? Is there something they can do to prevent it, do you think?
That's a really broad question.
I know.
I mean, I'm going to focus in on people who are more at risk for it in the aspect of there's something like PTSD. And I'm going to say this in a very military, harsh, inappropriate way. Man the fuck up and deal with your shit. I kept my mouth shut for a long time and internalized, and you can see where it took me. We don't want to talk about our issues, but anything, alcohol, drug addiction, whatever, there's an underlying cause. Take it to food. People who have eating problems, anything, there's an underlying thing, and you can either deal with it or you can end up addicted. You have a choice. But the alternative to addiction requires work, and it requires you to do uncomfortable things. I surely did not want to have this conversation today.
No, he's been dreading it the whole time we decided to do this today, and I had to watch him dread it without being able to help.
Yeah. But
I have no idea what we're going to find out there half done.
but it takes work, and it takes doing things that are uncomfortable. But you can either fix the problem or you can suffer for it. This is about the best answer.
Yeah, I'll tag on as somebody who dealt with a different issue with a psychologist that sometimes you don't know the underlying problem. So it's not like, hey, you have an underlying problem, go deal with it, right? It's like you have to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
I had to go to a psychologist to figure out what my underlying problem was for two things in the last 5 years, which has freed me up in a lot of ways.
I feel like I just had this conversation with somebody else that I was actually blessed in the fact that my underlying issue is pretty obvious.
Yeah, we know what that is. Well, you might have other ones. We don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing I have is from Pack Rat, which was not necessarily intended as a question, but I thought it was interesting. There's a seemingly insurmountable gap between your type of despair and believing you can make a change. And that was around the time we were talking about your suicidal phase. Any advice on somebody who might have suicidal ideation about finding a way to bridge that gap and come all the way back to themselves and all the way back to life?
That at one point was my hope. The 45 hollow point. I mean, I said it earlier that it seemed like a permanent problem. And in a way, it still is.
Permanent solution.
No, permanent problem.
Okay. Yeah.
My PTSD hasn't gone away. But this was not the only solution to that problem. It took me trying to figure out what the alternative was. It's still a problem. It will probably always be a problem for me. But there's more than one solution to every problem. And when you get into that kind of pain, it's easy to get sucked into the hole, and that's the only thing you can see. So the first thing you have to do is break out of that, and you have to find something else. Something besides the pain. You've got to find some form of hope, something else to cling on to. But it is definitely not the only solution. And I'm inclined to think that anybody that's that far down the rabbit hole is probably so far away from any kind of love that the only thing you could see is darkness. And I've been down a whole rabbit hole on love within the last month and a half. And it's changed my perspective on so much.
And you went down that rabbit hole not feeling love. Just like, I'm pretty sure I should feel love, and I'm not feeling love, so I guess I'll learn about it.
Yeah. And I mean, really, it started a couple of years ago, driving back from that meeting. It's taken me a while to get to the point where I'm at now, but I think that was one of the biggest turning points. Find something to love.
Are you more or less aware of the energy that people bring when you meet them since going through this?
I'm not going to say that I'm that in tune to it. I have an aspect of there are certain things that I can see when interacting with other people, but I think that's fairly specific to me and my experience and my perceptions. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, this has been a hard talk for Tactical, and I wanted to thank you for being so open today. I hope, again, if anybody hears this and wants to reach out, and doesn't want to reach out in the comments on YouTube or on my blog or whatever, send an email, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com. If you want to connect with Tactical and you don't want to tell me why, that's fine. Just tell me you want to connect with him, just because I'm not going to blast your email out on a YouTube video.
Yeah.
So Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com. If you want to tap into the community, we've got a Telegram group. It's LFTN group on Telegram, the Living Free in Tennessee group on Facebook. And this is the first episode of the Living Free podcast, which will probably end up having different things, but connect with us. If you can't come to one of our meetups here, we have one in 2 weeks on a Sunday afternoon. Connect with somebody else's, because I find when you start making real relationships, it starts putting you in touch with the critical questions you need to answer. And if he can build freedom into his life and go from a miserable existence to a happier place, I think anybody can.
Yeah.
So, thank you again.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.